want to say thank you to you, Ramloti and Jonathan. Thank you for hosting these events. This is absolutely wonderful for the family that we can share our experiences and meet each other, especially during these times where it's also difficult. And we, of course, look forward to coming back to America one of these days. So my journey, I'll start and talk just most of you know my story. I've been around a long time, but it did start in California in 1970. In June of 1970, at my graduation, June or July of 1970, at my graduation from high school, we were at a big party in a forest in California, and an old saint walked out of the forest. I was still quite young. I was only 16 years old. And I saw this, what looked to me like this very, very funny looking man. I thought it was Santa Claus. And I made a very rude remark and said, "Hey, Santa Claus, come back in December." Yeah, because it was, and anyway, he walked over and said he wanted to talk to me. And he spent the entire night. I was with my family at the beginning, but he and I walked off together, and we spent the entire night until the sun rose the next morning. And he told me about Babaji and that I was being called to go to India. And I ran away that day to start this journey. So since basically the summer of 1970 until today, I've been many years searching, then found, reborn. I learned in India, one of the things I learned is that you can't change your basic nature, but you can change your habits. And that was such a strong teaching to me, that you had to accept who you are. And then Babaji used to tell us this wonderful story from time to time about the power of Chandan, and how the tradition of Chandan came from Lord Krishna, and that he had a sad and poor best friend who wasn't making it very well in this life. And Krishna put the Chandan on him and changed his karma, changed changed who he was actually. And his life began to take off, and he became a better version of himself, let's say a more close to God and more close to humanity version of himself. He became a purposeful human being. And that's certainly what Babaji did with me. I think I was lost, and then I was found. Mm-hmm. It's 43 or 44 years now. I met Babaji in 77, and now it's 44 years. And I feel that I'm still I always feel like I'm just on the cusp of beginning to understand a little bit of what he tried to teach me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. My journey began in 1982, and I was a university student at the time. And I had been exposed from around 14 to meditation, TM meditation. And then while I was in university, I had started doing, practicing Kundalini yoga, but not so much as a student of Yogi Bhajan, but really as a class at university. And I was also really interested in Zen Buddhism. So that was my orientation. And why I bring that up is I had a mindset that was very anti-guru. And I think you'll understand in a moment why that was important. And I had no interest in India whatsoever, none. And I would say of all the things I've been practicing, Zen Buddhism seemed to appeal to me the most. It was ascetic, it was clean, it was the bare essentials. And India was just as far away from that as I could possibly imagine. And I had a friend that I used to argue with about this. He was 17 years older, and he was very devoted to his teacher. And I was all of 20, and I absolutely knew the truth of the universe with great confidence. And we would engage in these debates. So that was my mindset, not interested in India, anti-guru, the path is an inward journey. So why on earth would we pursue it with an outer presentation, and to whom we would then also have to be very surrendered and accepting. So that was the framework. And it was April of 1982. I attended an intensive, I had had my first heartbreak, and I attended a 5-day immersive retreat with Sandra Ray and the Loving Relationships training. So I had done the big group with 200 people, and this was sort of the second stage, and it was a small group. And on the very first evening, there was a little side table, kind of far away, not center stage, that caught my attention. And at the first break of the first evening, I walked over, and it was a headshot of Babaji in the very early days. And I didn't know who it was. To me, in that photograph, he looked like a Tarahumara Indian, northern Mexican Indians from the Sierra Madres that have never been integrated really into the Mexican culture. But all I knew is I was like a moth to the fire, to the flame. And I went and I started sobbing in a way that was, number one, uncontrollable, inexplicable, and it frightened me. And in that moment, the observer kind of separated my mind and observed me and was going, what the hell is going on? And I was 20 and I felt really shaken by that. And, but Sandra noticed. And when I went up and I asked her, I kind of demanded in a way, like, is this a Tarahumara Indian? And trying to assert some kind of control over the whole situation. She said, no. And I said, well, who is it? She said, well, he's a Mahavatar and he's my guru. Now, normally those things should have made me turn and walk away, especially guru. But instead, out of my mouth came the words, can people go see him? And once again, my mind was observing, but it was like something else was in charge. Absolutely. And it wasn't the I that I knew myself to be. And it was really clear from that moment that I was pulled. So she asked me, she said, if you'd like, when the session is over this evening, I'll take you to my altar in my room. And which she did. And when I entered the room, I didn't know it then that it was Babaji's presence, energy, essence that was permeating the room, but it was unmistakable. And it was familiar. It was indelibly imprinted in me. And I will always be grateful for that from Sandra. And so from that moment forward until I met him in December of 1982 of that same year, I was really carried in his energy forward through dreams, through meditations, through mystical experiences. The connection was made and it remained until now. So against all my mental constructs, Babaji definitely called me. It was not, I would have fought it tooth and nail. The me that I thought myself to be would have resisted it. So it was compelling and it remains compelling. That's how I got it.
I love that story because it just points to the fact that Babaji calls people, whether you're there in Huracan or in Princeton, New Jersey, probably is the area you were in, somewhere like that. So it's beautiful.
And that was the beginning really of, for me, I always felt that I had a spiritual nature from very little. I was aware of it. But one of the things I remember, one of the first realizations with Babaji was that I was experiencing a kind of love that I had never come close to in my entire life. And remember, I had just turned 21 when I actually met him. And I come from a very tight-knit family where my mother is definitely the pillar, the center, more than my father. And at that time, I had an idealization of my mother and of my mother's love. And I remember thinking, I've never experienced love like Babaji radiates to me, to all of us, not even my mother's love, because it was the purest, the most unconditional. It's like he knew us with all our foibles, with all our weaknesses, with all our blemishes, and yet he loved us absolutely. There was no question. And yet he knew us. I remember realizing that he could read my thoughts from day one. It was terrifying because I thought, oh, there's nowhere to hide. There's just nowhere to hide. You know, it's like an X-ray. And that, of course, was confirmed over and over. And so the slow realization that, yes, he knew us through and through, all of it, and he loved us through and through, was, for me, overwhelming. Just one of the most extraordinary, still, experiences of my life. And a teaching that is difficult to live up to.
Yeah, difficult to live up to. You know, recently I heard a YouTube of a doctor describing an experience of how he got into natural medicine and how his journey deepened as a medical practitioner. And it happened because it happened during a time that he was taking care of people who were dying. And he had the experience several times of some people who died but came back, and were dead for some minutes or even half an hour, but they were able to save them and they came back. And he said there was, you know, people always ask, so what did you go? Where did you go? What did you see? What did you experience? And he said, from children to old people, from Africans to Indians, the whole gauntlet of humanity that he dealt with, the one common thing that everybody said was that they felt loved and they felt not judged. And they felt comfortable with themselves for the first time in their life, that moment when they left their body. And I think that's what it was to meet Babaji. Not that we died. Of course, we didn't die. We were like reborn, but the comfort that you feel when somebody sees you and doesn't judge you, when somebody sees you and loves you. And as Jamuna just said, she felt, you know, it made her uncomfortable to know that it frightened her that to know that he could actually go into our heads, and he knew what was going on. He actually knew it. And every day we sing the Arti, which is a prayer to remove that veil, that part of ourselves that tries to hide from everything else, and to try to hide from that what's really important in our life. And I think was really the miracle of knowing Babaji.
Yeah, it's quite an all-encompassing feeling, experience. I remember one time you were sharing a story with me, Kharku, when Babaji sent you away. And you were in tears because you talked about that he was like, he was your father. And he was your all, and how much you loved him and you felt his love. I don't know if you want to reflect on that, because one of the things, as you were saying that, you know, here 44 years later, I'm still trying to, you know, I'm still slowly understanding. And I think that's the beauty of these thought songs, is that we do understand a little bit, even though I heard your stories some years ago many times. They're all different now because you're experiencing them different. So I don't know if you can speak to that love that you felt, but it certainly touches me.
In the very first few days that I was in Harakan, Babaji took me for a bath. He took me for a bath with Sri Muniraji, and we walked. I mean, I had just arrived. It was still the early old Harakan, and we walked up the river quite a ways. I think more than a kilometer or two from the ashram. And we stopped, and the three of us, and Babaji was talking, and he asked me some questions, and I remember one of the questions he asked me was, I let him know that I had a son. And he said, I didn't give you permission to have a son. And that's a really big responsibility. And that, maybe I can share later, opened up into a whole teaching that he gave me. But another thing that happened was he gave me my Janeo string that day. He gave me the Janeo string and he said, here, you wear this string and I will always be with you. We'll always be connected. I will always protect you. And that day, he and Muniraji, he told me that Muniraji was also my guru. And then they both gave me my mantra. In each ear, they both blew the mantra in my ear, side by side. Sometime later, Babaji sent me on a trip, and it's a really, really, really long story, so I won't use up all the time telling the story. But I came back from a trip, and Babaji tried to give me a lesson that I had broken a sacred bond. I had complained, I had gone to Haldwani on my way somewhere, and in Haldwani I had complained about the food in Harakan, that it was too hot and spicy. And if this Indian devotee who was close to Babaji would please go and tell him to make the food a little less spicy for the foreigners. And then I left on this trip. I came back a couple of weeks later. And that was the day I gave Babaji the Om Namah Shivaya bracelet that became our Om Namah Shivaya bracelet. I designed them in Nepal. And Babaji said, Kharku, you've burned a hole in your plate. You burned a hole in your thali, he said. And he said, in India, we see every person as an emanation of God. We never know when God is going to show up. So we all take care of our guests as if our guest is God. And I provide you with food. I send horses to Haldwani. I send men to Haldwani, and they carry the food back on there. And then I prepare the food and I feed you. This is me serving you. I'm serving you. And then you went and complained about my gift, my offering to you. And so you've burned a hole in your plate and you're no longer welcome here. You have to go. I thought it was a very powerful lesson, but I just pretended like I didn't hear what he said and went back down the stairs to the river. And later when I came back, he allowed me to make pranam to him, and I was very nice. And then at a certain point, he again told me, he reminded me that I couldn't live in Harakan anymore and I should go back to Nepal. And then the next day I was still there. I still didn't go. And I mean, I just couldn't even believe it. I mean, Babaji, I love you so much. How can you ask me to leave? It's impossible. I actually was like maybe like a pre-2-year-old where my identification was so strong, I couldn't hear the reprimand. And on the third day, I was coming up bringing water up, the buckets of water up. We filled the water tank every morning. And Babaji was standing on the other side of the ashram, and my luggage was tied on a horse. And he hit the horse. I ran up to him and said, Babaji, that's my luggage. And he said, Baba, no love. Kharku, no obey orders. And in that moment, I can still remember it. The tears flew straight out. I think they splashed Babaji as my knees gave out and I fell on the ground. And as I was falling on the ground, I grabbed I said, Babaji, can I keep my string? Don't, I have to stay connected. That was I think that was, anyway, the horse, he slapped the horse and the horse went off and he sent me chasing the horse. And I completely collapsed. I collapsed in those ways that you do when you lose your lover, when you lose a parent, when you lose a child. I guess I was like, I couldn't get my legs together to stand up. I couldn't make them work. And then he was yelling at me and telling me, go to Kathmandu and tell, there was another one of his devotees in Kathmandu, and he said, you tell him he can't come back either. And that was like then I had something to do. He gave me direction. Then I marched off to Kathmandu to tell somebody that they were also in trouble. I mean, when you see the psychology of how we are and how we operate. But that was by far the moment that connected me with Babaji completely and totally and absolutely. That I defined my whole life through this relationship. That bound me together with him so profoundly. And when I arrived in Kathmandu a few days later, because it took days to get from Harakan to Kathmandu, there was a letter from Babaji in Kathmandu to me, which means he had to have sent of course he could have done anything, but if it actually went through the mail, that letter couldn't have possibly got to Kathmandu faster than me. But the letter was already there. And Babaji said in the letter that, and I don't remember who wrote the letters then, because Gora Devi was in Kathmandu also at that time. So I don't remember who actually wrote the letter for Baba, but the letter said to start a business making those Om Namah Shivaya bracelets, and then I would be allowed back to Harakan. And then I became a mad businessman.
Told you.
Yeah, and in that letter also, he informed one of his devotees in Kathmandu to give me the $3,000 to start that business. It was 45,000 Nepalese rupees. It was $3,000, and that started the business and that whole trajectory that Babaji taught me also to be the fundraiser for his mission.
Thank you, Kharku.
It's a big memory. It's a huge memory. I mean, I could talk for hours just about those first few weeks, because he laid the groundwork. He absolutely laid the groundwork for everything. You know, like with my son, when he told me I didn't have permission to have a son, he took a photograph of my son, and he took some of his hair and he wrapped it around the photograph of my son, and he put it in an envelope, and he wrapped it all up, and then he put it in an envelope in a credit card case that you could see the picture through the plastic. And he told me to keep it with me always, and he would always protect my son. But he kept reiterating that it was a really big responsibility. And I can just very briefly say that all of the training that Babaji gave me for the next 7 years was how to face responsibility, how you cannot escape from anything, any karma that you've created, you have to work it through, there's no running away. He made me do business. All I wanted to do was live in Harakan. He made me, I raised money not just for him, but he made me raise money for my son that he could go to the best schools. I bought a house for his family. My son's mother had more children. He had me bring all of them. I had to buy them all tickets and bring all of them to India to live with Babaji so that they would all become devotees. He helped. I mean, when Sandy was getting married, he had me bring the new husband, who was going to be the stepfather of my son, to India and meet with Babaji, and Babaji instructed him on what it meant to be the stepfather of my son, and how that would give me the comfort to be Babaji's disciple if I knew that he was there to take care of my son, and I would be free to serve Babaji fully. And again and again and again, Babaji gave me lessons that taught me to face life. Because I had spent my whole life prior to meeting Babaji, I was just running away. I ran away from everything, from my family, from my duties, from everything. And he turned me completely around and changed who I am. Sorry, I shouldn't take all the time.
No, please.
Yeah, that's the beauty of satsang. It's just things come up. And also, if anybody listening would like to ask more questions or anything, please just unmute and feel free to, okay?
Did the two of you meet in Harakan?
We did.
Oh, okay.
We both have different memories of when we first met. which is not unusual since we were all really focused on Babaji. I think, the memory of anything else is secondary. For me, my first memory was that I had asked Babaji permission to go back to Delhi to pick up my mother, who was arriving from the US. And he said yes, but then I had no idea how to actually do it. So I was sitting early morning in one of the chai shops. I had gone to Chandan, and I was collecting myself to ask and get directions and sort of figure it out. But not really worried, because I was, ever since that first contact with the photo of Babaji, truly I was being carried in the stream of his energy. And I was very, very, very aware of that. So it wasn't with anxiety or worry or fretting. I was sort of in a knowing that I would be able to ask someone and get it sorted out. And into the little chai shop on the riverbed, ducks, Kharku, full of energy. Hi, morning, and sits down, and we're having a chai together. And he goes, "What are you doing here?" And it was empty. And I said, "Oh, I have to go to Delhi today. I'm going to go pick up my mother, who's arriving, and then bring her back." He goes, "Oh, do you have that all arranged?" I'm like, "No." And right in that moment, some villagers were coming from farther up north, kind of walking, a group of 3 of them walking really fast. And he engages them in a conversation in, I guess, Hindi or Nepali or whatever. And then says, go, I've arranged for you. Just follow them. They'll take you to the bus station and then take the bus into Delhi. But go, you got to keep up with them. I'm like now? He goes, yeah. And so off I went, trotting behind these guys who were really walking at a pace. It was really not walking compared to the pace we have, and limb on the riverbed. And as I'm walking away, it's kind of jogging away, I'm thinking, wow, this guy is really a can-do guy. And it was so thoughtful. I didn't even ask for help. And he just jumped in, rolled his sleeves up, fixed it, and off you go. And I didn't even ask him. That's awesome. I was blown away. I was absolutely flabbergasted. That's the first memory I have. And Kharku has a different memory. And then, of course, after that, when I came back, every moment that I had free, which was not a lot, because Babaji had me sort of shadowing him pretty much throughout the day into the evening. But there would be these little moments where I would have a little break. Within really no time at all, Kharku would be there. Hi, let's have a tea together. And we developed a profound friendship with just really based on sharing what we were experiencing on a day-to-day basis with Babaji. That was the thrust of our conversations. It wasn't a male-female romantic type of relationship at all, but it was suffused with love for Babaji. And of course, then the friendship grew from that. That was my experience.
I have a better memory. I have a longer memory, so I go back a couple of weeks earlier than that wonderful morning. I had come back from Kathmandu. It was Christmas, just after Christmas of 1982, and I had returned back from Kathmandu because Babaji sent me back and forth constantly, and I was walking up the stairs. And when I got to the top of the stairs, there was a little bench outside of the doorway going, on the platform before you went down into Babaji's room or up into the temple. And Jamuna was sitting there with her little mundan and her little round cheekies. And we just started chatting. We were just chatting. And, Babaji had made me do business. And I thought, I didn't understand the lesson as I explained it earlier, how he taught me about responsibility. And my first years of doing business, I resisted it, and I thought he was punishing me. I really felt like I was being punished, and I, who came to India to be a saint, had to be a businessman. I thought it was like one step above hell. And I remember this really strongly in this moment because I talked with Jamuna for like 10 or 15 minutes, and then Babaji's door opened. Mansingh came out or something, and then I ran down to say hello to Babaji because I had just come back. And I made my pranam. I was talking to Babaji for 1 or 2 sentences, and I said, Babaji, I just met this girl. She's sitting upstairs. I want to marry her, and then I'll do business. I'll be happy to do business. That would be, then I'll stop resisting. And Babaji said to me, not yet. He said that, not yet. And I was walking up the stairs, and Jamuna was already gone when I got up the stairs, but I heard Babaji, uh-oh, are we still there?
Yeah. You're fine.
Okay, for some reason, yeah. But I heard Babaji say in Hindi to whoever was standing next to him, that woman has the attention of all my men, And I'll never forget, I heard that, but he said to me, not yet. That was the pivotal thing. So yeah, 11 years I wrote letters to Jamuna. And just a cute little anecdote to that is, Jamuna stayed several months, and
6 months.
6 months. So we met often. Of course, I was in and out all the time because Babaji had me in and out all the time. And then when it was time for Jamuna to go back to America, Babaji made this big announcement. I mean, not a big announcement, but to us, he said, okay, Jamuna, you go to America, you go and stay at this house in New Delhi. Kharku, you go with her and you stay at that house too. And Jamuna didn't know I was in love with her. We never showed that kind of affection because we were with Babaji, but I was over the moon. I was just over the moon. And anyway, and then the next day, Babaji changed the story and said, Kharku, you stay at this house and you stay at that house. And I knew that was complete opposite sides of Delhi. And I thought, how are we going to meet? Why did he do that? And then he said, Jamuna, you go tomorrow. Kharku, you don't go now. And then he sent Jamuna off. And then I had to wait. And then a couple of days later, he sent me. And I was in turmoil inside because I was besmitten. I was totally besmitten. And she was just in love with Babaji. I was in love with Babaji too, but I was also in love. And anyway, in India in those days, before you flew on an international flight, you actually had to go 2 days before to the airline office and announce that you were going to take the flight. Otherwise, they would give your seat away. So I knew when she was flying, and I went and camped out at the Air India office until she came. Just so I can say goodbye to her properly.
Literally. I went in one morning, early morning, and I was sitting waiting, and I feel this tap, tap. So I kind of move out, like I thought someone just accidentally tapped, and it's tap, tap, and I turn around and it's Kharku. He goes, oh, I've been waiting for you to come. I'm like, what? I was really, really surprised. But I wanted to share something about, it's just the story just came as Kharku was sharing, an experience that Babaji, my experience with Babaji was that he had to help heal for me. And I think Kharku would agree, and maybe it's true for other people, I don't know, but he had to help heal so many emotional and psychological wounds as he tried then also to awaken us spiritually. Like it was part of what he did in these miraculous ways without ever having conversations with us to figure out what those were. He just knew them and he addressed them and he put balm on them. And one of those for me was an experience. I had been there, I think maybe 3 or 4 months, and there were very few people. It was after the spring Navaratri of '83. And the ashram had emptied out, and I was staying in the women's dorm that was underneath Babaji's room on balcony. It was down there. And one day on the riverbed in the afternoon when I was taking my bath, this young woman arrived. And so as we all did, I went to greet her and I helped her out and I took her to the office and brought her into, and she was told to come into the room with me. And so we were one of maybe 3 or 4 people that were there. And she was lovely. And she became someone, you know, as very few of us were there. And then at a certain point, I was with Babaji out on a riverbed in one of these days, and it was just the two of us, and he was seated comfortably. I was seated next to him, and he had on this beautiful, beautiful crystal mala. Beautiful, very, very large crystal beads, very multifaceted, and the light just shimmered on it. But I wouldn't have noticed it if he didn't keep pulling it out and dangling it right in front of my face. And he literally would just pull it out and kind of play with it while he looked in an opposite direction, very surreptitiously. And I was 21, and I started smiling to myself, knowing that he was sort of eliciting what was there, this sort of admiration of it, this desire of it, you know, but he really was flaming it. Like when you put little twigs to create a fire, literally like that. And he kept doing it until finally I was like, yes, in my head, I was saying, yes, yes, I see it. I like it. No question. And then he turned and he goes, Jamuna, you like? As he dangled it one more time under my eyes. And I said, yes, Babaji, it's very beautiful. And then he dropped it and he goes, not yet, and got up and walked off. And I burst out laughing because I thought it was just like, what was that, you know? And it really made me laugh. And then I forgot about it. And then, I don't know, some time passed, and I had my monthly menstrual cycle. And as many of you know, at that time in the Indian Hindu tradition, you don't, you're not in the temple, you're not in the kitchen, etc. So I was in my room, and I wasn't with Babaji because my duty was to be with Babaji and in his proximity. So I stayed in my room, and this young girl who had arrived, who I had helped and welcomed, one day of those 4 days arrives, walks in the room in the middle of the day, and she's wearing this beautiful crystal mala. And I knew the minute she walked in, I knew it was that crystal mala. I knew it. And so I said, that's really, really beautiful. Where did you get it? And she said, Babaji gave it to me. Now, I come from a family of 3 girls. And if any of you have siblings, girls, there is a lot of rivalry, especially vis-a-vis the father. So, and in my family, that definitely existed because my father and my let's just say my father was scarce in his presence. So we definitely competed for his attention. And I remember feeling all these feelings, but I really liked this young woman. But now I had all this, you know, sort of jealousy and kind of she's replacing me and whatever went through that got activated. And I thought that was the lesson, that Babaji, like he fueled our desire, he fueled our love, he allowed the things that were in us to come up to consciousness and then helped us with it. So I thought that was the end of the lesson, and I thought it was very, very powerful. And it was not an ego enhancing lesson in any way, but then that wasn't the point, you know, either. And some time passed, and then I went back to the States. And at some point I had the news that Babaji had left his body, about his Mahasamadhi, and that was really, I had quite some time where I just wanted to die. It was very, very, very difficult for me to get through that experience and that loss. And then I think it was by the summer of '84, no, maybe later, a gift arrives from India. And it's from Kharku. And it's a box with Babaji's crystal mala. And he didn't know the story. And he didn't know any of this. But maybe you can share how that came to be. But without knowing that, Babaji had said, not yet. And for me, it was in that moment that I understood deeply and profoundly that he had never left. That our connection and his teachings and his presence and his giftings and love and consciousness still very much was alive. And it was really important for me to know that, because the loss of him in the physical form had really, really been difficult for me. So that was what was arising. But how you came, how Kharku knew or didn't know, but was part of that piece was really beautiful for me.
Babaji uses us. We're all used by him. Babaji didn't teach like a traditional Indian teacher. Babaji did not preach like a traditional Indian teacher. You know, India is a very sophisticated culture. The tradition, the spiritual traditions of India, the Vedic traditions, and how they evolved into what became the Hindu traditions, is a long, methodical story that all makes sense. And traditionally, there are methods of teaching the Sanatan Dharma for Hinduism or Vedic tradition, or just these spiritual traditions. There are very traditional ways of teaching them. Babaji didn't touch any of that. He allowed Sastraji to give us a little bit, to give the hints, and Babaji always in his talking referred to, if you go deep into it, you can find that there's almost always references to some scripture where you could then read those scriptures and try to understand. And I remember when I first met Babaji, the very first day when I was there, and I had this extraordinary first encounter with Babaji, and then as he sent me off to the cave, I gave him all these books that I had brought to show him how well I had practiced and studied before I got there. All what I thought the most important books for a student. And he threw them off his deck down into the river. And he said to me, "Here, I teach from experience."
You said what? Kharku, I didn't hear that.
I teach with experience. I will teach you through experience. He said, a man spends his life in a cave meditating, and then he writes a book, and you read it in 2 or 3 days. I teach from experience. Babaji spent, oh my God, it's a flood of things that he gave to us. He taught us every day. He reminded us and he taught us how to listen to our own hearts. No Hindu scripture. You know, Ramloti, earlier I said to you, everything Babaji taught us was scriptural. And I really mean that. But there's no real scriptural teachings on how you listen to your heart. There are scriptural teachings on how you set the intention of your heart so that you can then listen. But that's everything that Babaji did with us. Every day he reminded us, you know, you thought a question, you got an answer. You asked a question, the answer didn't come from his words, it came from the next thing that happened to you. The next person who walked by, stumbling on the walkway, whatever it was, you got the answer. And he taught us that this is our intellect and this is our mind, and our mind and our heart are synonymous, and we have to constantly listen. Jamuna can share an extraordinary story of Babaji asking for a pair of shoes when she first got there, how he taught her the importance of listening to the intuition, the really learning how to hear. And Babaji taught us that we create our reality by focusing our attention with our heart and our emotions. And he shows us he taught us when we did it wrong, how many mistakes that we make and how much new karmas we add onto our life. And when we do it right, what extraordinary creative forces we are when we're totally in tune with that divine energy. That's really what he came and gave us, is how to stay in touch with that divine energy, just to believe in it, to focus on it, to stay in touch within it so that we're always guided by it. And then he taught us to have the courage to listen to the guidance. And now, I'm sorry, but now more than ever in this crazy time that we're in, all the teachings that Babaji gave us are the saving grace and the opportunity for us to actually make a difference in this world. Sorry.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That lesson, teaching, blessing of really listening to the voice inside our hearts before the mind, the intellect mind begins to speak, was has guided my life 100% since then. And it was really simple. It was like it would have been so easy to overlook it. I had just arrived, and the very first day in Harakan, Babaji sort of pulled me aside and kind of wanted me to stay back. And then as people went to the different roles, he asked me to get a word I couldn't understand, his shoes from his closet. And maybe it was not the first day, maybe it was within the first week, the first few days. And I walked into where his clothes and closets were, and there were a huge array of shoes that people gifted him. And one pair of shoes really jumped out at me. I mean, really like if a spotlight was on them immediately. But they were lace up, camouflage, ugly as anything shoes. And so my mind immediately said, it can't be those, because they had this army kind of camouflage pattern. They were rubbery, and they were lace up. Like, can you imagine, in and out everywhere, taking them on and off? And so I just thought, no, it can't be those. And then Gora Devi was there. So I asked her, because I knew that she had been there a very, very long time. And I asked for her guidance. And I said, Babaji asked for a pair of shoes, but I couldn't understand the word. Could you please advise me? And she said, oh, give him these shoes. They're easy to put on and off, and he really likes them. They're his favorites. I said, oh, great. I was so thankful. And I came back and I presented them very respectfully. And he took them and threw them on the balcony, very exasperated, and leaned into me and repeated his request. And as the first time, I could not understand the word he was asking for. I really couldn't. It was like a jumble. And now I'm nervous because I don't want to make a mistake again. He's quite emphatic that he wants the right shoes. And I'm someone that has always tried to please the grown-ups, so to speak, the parents. And so I really wanted to do a good job. And now my heart is beating and I'm sweating, and I go back into this room, and Gora Devi's not there. And I look, and those same ugly shoes are like, boom, boom. And I'm like, no, that can't, it's like not, that won't work. But this time, Katargiri Ramdas is there. And he's folding some things. And I said, oh God, yes, another guy that's experienced that can guide me. And so I asked him, and he hands me a pair of shoes, and it's a repetition of the first round, but now more emphatically by Babaji, throwing the shoes and loudly and almost nose to nose asking for these shoes. And so I'm now shaking. And when I say I'm shaking, I really am shaking. It's not a metaphor. My whole body is shaking, and I'm mortified. Now it's beyond anxiety. And I walk in the room, and no one's there to ask. And so I literally, rather than doing what had been sort of calling out to me, I start eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a monkey by the toe. I literally start doing that because I said, it's random. I don't know what to do. And then I said, well, that's ridiculous. If you're going to be random, might as well take the ones that, jumped out at you. So I did, thankfully. And I present them to Babaji, and he takes them very lovingly with this big smile and nods. And I got it. It was really, I got it. And for me, I have a very strong intellect. It's a trained intellect. And I have an equally strong heart and intuition. And that lesson it's invaluable for me. Because even Sastraji, one day when Babaji asked people to go and see Sastraji in the temple and he would read their hands, I really wanted to do it. So I had gone. And the minute Babaji looked at my hand, one of the key things he said, you have a really, really strong and clear and sharp intellect, mind, and you have an equally strong and clear and vibrant heart. But sometimes they're not in harmony. And I was like, yes, 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 my God, yes. And I said, yes. And I said, but which one should I listen to? That was the only question. I was like, which one should I listen to? And Sastri said, you listen to Babaji, do what he tells you. Which didn't resolve my, the mind or the heart at all. And here was Babaji giving me this lesson that even as outrageous as my mind might think it is, there is this guiding voice, and I can trust it and I can listen. And it doesn't come in this big oceanic sort of wow, emotion, passion. It's not that one. It's very subtle. And sadly, when I have tried to share this to people over the years, when I have, I sometimes facilitate groups or retreats or counseling consultations, I often meet people who say, but I don't have that voice inside me. And I know that's not true, but what I didn't realize is not everyone has had a relationship with that voice. And I think Babaji did know how to ignite that, so that for me, it was very clear. And I think I'd had that relationship, but Babaji turned the flame up on that. But I think now, with all the distractions and all the stimulation on the outer, I think really some people don't feel they have that voice, even though they have it. And I think devotion is one of the ways to flame that, to sense it more powerfully. And we were all very fortunate, and we are very fortunate, because it's so easy to feel that devotion to the divine through Babaji.
Would anybody like to ask a question? I love questions.
Okay,
Hi.
this one.
Thank you for those stories. They've answered a lot of questions that I had, but I have one. Could you tell a little bit more about your experience with Mahendra Maharaj?
Oh. So when I started this satsang this morning, I mentioned that when I was 16 years old, just before my 17th birthday, I met this Indian man, and of course I had no idea who it was.
Was that Santa Claus?
Santa Claus, who I called Santa Claus, and I had no idea who that was. It was just a man that looked like Santa Claus, and but clearly he was Indian. After I spoke with him, I knew he was Indian from the accent and everything. But I was a young kid in California. I didn't have any experience at that time of. I was interested in Christianity. I was already a little bit spiritual, but I was also a young man, and I wanted to go to Vietnam. All my friends were going to Vietnam. I was, ready to be in the Air Force, go out and prove myself. I wasn't thinking of going to India until that moment. And later, I got to India 7 years later. So I met Babaji when I was 23 in the flesh, but he called me when I was 16. Actually, that was the month he appeared in Harakan, when he started his mission. And I left on my way to India. I was always on my way to India, but life got in the way. I had a baby. I had lots of experiences. I had extraordinary training on my way to Babaji, so I was even more prepared. But when I arrived, I was 23 years old. And the first night that I went into the Kirtan hall, right next to Babaji, is a painting of Mahendra Maharaj. And the first time I was pranaming to Babaji, I made pranam, and I was looking at him and all of that. And I saw the picture, and I said to Babaji, I met him. And Babaji he just nodded, and he just acknowledged what I said. And to me, that was everything, that he made that acknowledgement. And then I realized that I had met Mahendra Maharaj. I told this story many times, and Mahendra Maharaj's devotees were in Harakan, many of them. coming and going from Vrindavan and from Rajasthan and the areas where they mostly were living. And Sastraji, I spoke to about it a few times, but Sastraji just was positive about everything, and I didn't, I just totally believed that I had met Minda Maharaj. So for me, that was 100% reality. But Minda Maharaj's devotees they thought I was just another crazy foreigner. And as you know, for a traditional Indian, a traditional Hindu Indian, someone who's born and raised as a Hindu, foreigners are below, we're not even really a life form in their deep, deep consciousness. Of course, we were all loving and close and Babaji's devotees, but we were, below outcast. So not to be believed or trusted. And many years went by. 7 years went by. And I always believed this, or maybe six years went by. I can't remember if you were there already or it was before Jamuna came. But one day, Babaji was sitting in his balcony outside of his room, and he was sitting with a group of devotees of Mahendra Maharaj, so the older devotees, and they were sitting together eating mangoes and nice. And I had to come bring something to Babaji, and he asked me to sit down. And I sat in this little circle with these older senior devotees. And Babaji asked me, he said, Kharku, you tell them your story. You tell them your story. And he'd never asked, 7 years, not once he ever mentioned it again. He never gave me the chance to share the story with him, and so it was cool. So I shared the whole story, how I was at this party and I met Minda Maharaj, and and he gave me all these teachings where I spent the whole night, and he told me I understood Hindu Dharma, I understood what books I had to read to get prepared to go to India. I knew I was going into the jungle, but I didn't know Babaji's name. He never said it's Babaji and he lives near Haldwan or something. So I didn't know where it was. And that was one of the things that slowed me down from getting there. Anyway, after I shared this whole story, these devotees kind of ridiculed me right in front of Babaji. You're crazy. They looked at Babaji and said, these foreigners, they make up these stories, what kind of imaginations they have. Minda Maharaj didn't speak English. He was dead. In 1970, he was already dead. He never left India. What a doozy. What a doozy of a story. And I looked up at Babaji like he's going to pat me on the back and say, no, this is what really happened. And Babaji got up and walked into his room and left me there naked, vulnerable and naked. I didn't know what to do or say. He didn't defend me. He didn't do anything.
He didn't back you up.
He didn't back me up. Thank you. And I think if ever I had a moment of doubt, I won't say I ever had a moment of doubt, because I don't think I've ever had a moment of doubt, but that day I was actually confused about the whole thing. I was really knocked down, confused. Nighttime comes, Arti's there, and as I did every night, I asked Babaji if I could come to Arti in the morning, come to Chandan in the morning, because that's what we did. And I stood next to him anyway, so I at one moment asked him, and he said to me, tomorrow you're first, you're number one, you come early. And that morning I was, I always got up around 3 anyway, but I got up at 3 that morning, and it was a moonless night. It was one of those dark nights in Harakan. I think many of you have been to Harakan and probably can remember that we lived by the stars, and when there was moonlight, full moon times, you bathed in the river that was glimmering with this shimmering light of the moon. And if it was really, really dark, it was really, really dark. And I slept down at the Duni. I went down, I went to the river to jump in, and I saw a little light in the river, and I thought, oh gosh, somebody dropped a flashlight. And I waded out into the river, and I reached down, and there's 1 billion, 1 trillion stones in the river of Harakan. And I reached down and I went to pick up what I thought was a flashlight, and I picked up a little locket with Babaji and Mahendra Maharaj painted on it. A little enamel locket. Now clearly it had fallen out of somebody else's necklace, because it didn't have the little frame around it that, people have those little lockets. And, but it was 3 o'clock in the morning in the dark. It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. got dressed really fast and I ran up and I was sitting outside of Babaji's room with this locket in my hand and I was shaking and I was blown away. And Man Singh opened the door and I was the first one to go inside. And I went in to make pranam and I had the locket in my hand and I made pranam to Babaji sitting on his bed. And he said, "Why are you giving it to me? I just gave it to you." And then he said, "Frame it in silver and wear it," which of course I did. And it was like my badge of my miracle with Babaji. And but Babaji did not bother, for whatever reason. No one can ever know why Babaji does things, but he did not defend me, back me up, or try to change the mind of the devotees of Minda Maharaj. But he gave me that honor and showed me that. I mean, truly, I had so many experiences where I know that Babaji did things that are just, they have to be miracles. They are miracles. But that was one of the most powerful and one of the most profound. And some years later, after Babaji had left his body, Sastriji asked me for it and I gave it to Sastriji. And I wore it so much as a badge that I had to give it away also. But that's my story of Minda Maharaj.
Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you.
You're very well.
So Mahin Maharaj met you in California?
Minda Maharaj met me in California, just outside of Auburn, a little city between Auburn and Grass Valley, just in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains.
Okay.
At my graduation. So at my graduation, several of my classmates, I graduated, when I came to the United States, I jumped ahead in the school system here. So I was only 16 when I graduated. My classmates were 18 and many of my classmates were going to Vietnam. It was the height of the war.
Right.
And they had organized a big party with live music out in a forest. It was like a hippie be-in party. It was the rage of the day. And so we were out in the forest, and Minda Maharaj just walked right out of, I just saw him he came through the trees and walked up, and he just walked straight up to me. I was making these jokes at him, and then started this conversation. And there was another thing that happened at that time. It was June, July of 1970, and there was a comet passing in the heavens at that time. I don't remember the name of the comet. I was not into astrology at that time, but there was a comet passing by in the heavens in that time, and you could see it with the naked eye. And the tail of the comet made it appear that there was a spotlight, and that you could look into another universe. That was the feeling that you got. And I was sitting. We walked around Minda Maharaj. We walked around through all the people. We sat up on this little hillside, and then 2 or 3 times in the night, we walked around all the people, first dancing, then sitting around little campfires, and then people sleeping. And he was trying to explain to me how people live in bubbles of consciousness. And he was trying to teach me, he was teaching me actually quite deep and profound Indian thought for a total novice. But it so inspired me that in the morning, we went with Minda Maharaj, we went back to my family, saw my sister and her boyfriend, and I told her then I was going to go to India. They were all kind of laughing. And then I went home, and my father asked me why I wasn't going to work. I said, "I'm not going to work, I'm going to India." We got in a big fight. I'll never forget that. We got in a really big fight, and then and that was it. And then only after I met Babaji, then 7 or 8 years later, Babaji sent me home so that my family knew I was okay. Told me to go home and visit my family.
Wow.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me.
Can you talk a little bit more about what Mahendra Baba was teaching you about living in these bubbles?
Well, it's 45 years ago, and I was 16 years old. It was deep philosophy, but what I remember and what stood out for me was that he said people live in their own bubbles. They make their own idea of the world. He was trying to show me, he was explaining to me how we create our own reality.
Our constructs of reality.
Our constructs of reality.
Yeah.
He was giving me some of the basic teachings of how we're participants. I mean, the reality that we live, the reality that we experience is based on our belief system. And, you know, certainly for me, I am not the same person that I was when I was a young person, you know, and I remember both Babaji and Muniraji told me I didn't have to be a part of my family anymore, that I had broken free of the need of those bonds. And that's, you know, in all traditions, I think in all traditions, I shouldn't be so bold as to state that, certainly in Western psychology, the way it's defined, and in Hinduism and Buddhism, as I've learned and understood, the idea of really developing a relationship with the divine is a complete process of individuation and recognizing our interconnectedness, but also our absolute aloneness.
Aloneness, you mean relative to the family dynamic?
Well, I mean also that we're completely alone in the universe. In one way, we're all connected, and that's the most beautiful thing, that life is relationship. It's how we are related to each other. That's why Babaji and Muniraji gave the most beautiful teachings on why we live in ashrams, why we take all these diverse personalities, all these diverse points of view, and put people together in one pot. And then how do you learn to live together? How do we be related to each other? You know, from our first moment of birth, we're related to our mother, and then our families, and then, but there are moments when you contemplate the awesomeness of the immensity of the reality that we live in, that we're also all alone. I don't know how to describe that in philosophical terms.
I'm not opposed at all to that. It seems to me that vis-a-vis Babaji and vis-a-vis my spiritual journey, what keeps getting underscored for me is more the unity, the absolute unity that is all pervasive. But that might be because where I came from in my childhood and in my family dynamics, on the what we would call the personal level or the relative plane of existence, which we're humans, we're in the relative, the laws of gravity, et cetera, I had more of a sense of aloneness, even within my own family. I felt quite separate. And the reasons for that don't really matter, but that was definitely how I felt. And Babaji addressed that right away in terms of taking me, bringing him very, very close to him, and then basically saying, this is your home now. This is again and again and again on a daily basis. And my realizing only later that I couldn't really settle into that. I literally felt, okay, for today maybe, but tomorrow that can change, which in fact with Babaji it could, but he was actually trying to get me to have a sense of belonging, of not being alone. So I'm just, in my own mind, I'm thinking and contemplating what you're saying, and I feel the way I resonate with it right now is that on the personal, relative plane, I'm very aware of that sense of being alone, and that we're born, and in the end we die alone, even if we're surrounded by people we love. It's a solo journey for sure. But on the other hand, from the perspective of Babaji and my spiritual journey, it has so much been about the experience of the unity and of the oneness. I mean, through experiences in the form of Babaji, but also in meditations, in dreams, in lucid dreams. It has always been about the unity with Babaji and that larger divinity. Again, like for me, it's been underscored in the other direction.
Oh, I'm 100% with you. I've experienced what I call the great aloneness. And I think through, we sing Arti, and Babaji did Havan. Havan is the perpetuation of the universe. It's getting in alignment with the movement of the heavens, with nature, completely in alignment with nature and the movement of the heavens to create abundance, to, as Babaji said, to bring rain, to bring grain, and the fundamentals of life. And every Hindu ritual, every Vedic ritual begins with the sankalp, with the setting of the intention, where you, and this is, let me try to explain. This is where we create the journey. We connect with consciousness, we connect with the divine, and we move in the direction where we intend to go. And we state that. So we're in total humility in the presence of consciousness, in the presence of the divine. And at the same time, the relationship is so pure that we actually can state our intention. And I remember Babaji telling me, not once, but many, many times during those first 7 years when we built the Gufa side, when we built the Fakirabad, when we carried rocks from morning till night. And he would say to me, Kharku, you don't come here to experience miracles, to see miracles. You come here because I teach you how to create miracles. And he used to say, all these rocks have consciousness. You're putting all of this in place, and people will come in the future. You'll see people will come from all over the world to see what you created. And you will create this. This is the miracle. And I felt that Babaji taught me, and I believe many of us, perhaps all of us, the miracle of creation, to teach us to be connected through our heart and through our intention. That's what I feel is the essence of what the Sanatan Dharma is to set the intention through our heart and to be connected to the intention of where we want to go, this divine journey, to get to know and understand the divine. And to do it by being a creative force in the world. He would tell us not to be nonviolent. He would tell us not to be nonviolent. He would tell us every day to be courageous, to step into the world and change the world. He would tell us, be lights, create islands, be lights and spread your light from candle to candle, from person to person.
Would you say it would be, I'm questioning, would you say that Babaji in a sense was encouraging and sort of igniting the consciousness of don't be passive, be active, but in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Right? Action versus passivity. And I think in many traditions, the passivity principle is really emphasized as a way of staying out of trouble, so to speak, because action it's a double-edged sword, right? But that Babaji encouraged us to take action, whether it was a karma yoga, whether it was this, but to be an active principle, but in the right direction.
Absolutely, without question. I mean, but the Indian people.
And I'm bringing that up. Sorry, I just want to say this. I'm bringing that up because that's actually a personal struggle of mine in terms of the active principle versus the passive principle in myself. Coming from a very, very feminine tradition and a very receptive tradition, and really being bred and cultivated to be very, very yin. And I am very yin. Babaji gave me the name of Jamuna Devi, the river goddess. It's like I'm very water, very feeling, very intuition, and finding how to access that and guide it into a more active principle without fighting my own nature is really my dance, is really my challenge. And during this time of COVID, honestly say it has tilted me more backwards into more of a passivity that is challenging. And yet right now, when you're sharing that, the lights are coming on in a really beautiful way for me, vis-a-vis what Babaji was really guiding us. It's helpful for me.
Babaji taught us Satya Saralta Prem, truth, simplicity, and love, and service to humanity. That was his main teaching. And he explained to me, we know the traditional Indian interpretation of that what the mind thinks the mouth should speak and the hand should do, that everything should be connected in this divine way. But Babaji elaborated on that and said that truth is to listen to your heart before your mind begins to speak. Because there's an intuitive moment that God is always speaking to us. So you listen. And that simplicity is to be satisfied with what you have, not to need more. And that if you do these two things, you get love, and love is God. He explained that to me more than once. And the Indian people taught us that Babaji was karma yoga, that Babaji was the Lord of karma. And I'm not that smart of a person. I'm not a scholar or anything, but from everything that I understand, karma is the law that every action has a reaction, has a consequence. And when we put consciousness into our actions, so that they're selfless actions or they're purposeful actions for something, as Babaji said, always be purposeful. Always be purposeful. You know, don't do things that don't have meaning. Don't do, and if it has meaning, make sure it's a positive meaning, so that you're always, I don't know if we're creating good karma or cleaning out old karma.
Or at least not creating more bad.
But we're at least not creating more bad karma. And Babaji also explained to me very clearly, because many Western people, when they come to Indian traditions or spiritual traditions, they think that money is bad, desire is bad. We have all these bads. But Babaji explained to me that desire is the foundation of life. That there's no moment of our life, without desire, we're dead. We cease to exist. So it's to channel desire into something that's positive and life affirming and life building. And I always try to remind people that Babaji was not a renunciate. Babaji created Harakan. He was a builder. He created something that was positive and life affirming. Babaji did Havan every morning. He did Havan, which is life affirming and life creating. Babaji was not the teacher of abandon this world and walk away. And when I came in 1977, long before electricity, before we had even buildings, there was just 2 or 3 buildings in Harakan. We were all living anywhere. He gave me a shortwave radio, and he said, don't lose touch with your culture. And made me listen to the BBC every day. He made sure that I listened to the BBC every day so that I would know what was going on. Because he told me right at the very, very beginning, this is your home now. You're going to stay here. And put me in charge of the health of everybody. And made me build a clinic. Immediately, I had to build my little clinic and start taking care of the local village people and treat them. I had no experience. He put me on the path of health, and look where it ended up as Kamalaya, you know. And Kamalaya is created completely by our faith in Babaji, because we could have never done anything like that.
No question.
If it wasn't based on faith and the idea of being able to set an intention and see and visualize. He said, visualize where it is, visualize where you're going, visualize what you see with heart, with emotion, and then create it. And we have to inspire each other. We just have to inspire each other. This is the time, I mean, this is the greatest moment in our lifetimes, the greatest opportunity that we have to actually make the world a better place. Because as it's so unstable and so unsure of itself, that means there are opportunities to create something better. Holy Babaji.
Does anyone have any last questions? It's been a wealth of sharing. Thank you so much. Yes. So somebody else has something that's popped into their mind.
Yeah, I have a question regarding how do you handle, in the present day situation where when your mind or when your intellect is saying something and the heart is conflicting with that. I mean, in your Jamuna's, one of the earlier, this one was taking the shoes. There was a clear indication that, okay, you go back to your heart, go back to your heart, go back to your heart. And what is that guiding now when such a kind of situation exists, happens now? I mean, after Babaji is not in the body and the present day life, where what you feel that what heart is saying is completely nonsense or completely useless, intellect is saying the other way. How is there any technique or anything that helps you to go back to your heart?
I really thank you for asking that question, because I think that's, first of all, is very alive in me, and it has changed over the years. So I will take a little time to answer it, but because it in different moments in my life, it has been different, but it's also really alive for me right now, and I'll explain. But I'll start going back. With Babaji, of course, you're right. I had this incredible blessing that he could give me the feedback right away. I mean, right away. And it happened numerous times, and we don't have time now for other stories of the same lesson, but it happened repeatedly, and the lessons were more difficult each time. And the feedback was a little bit stronger and harsher when I was off course over time, because his expectation was for me not to indulge myself off track. But those stories are for another time. So first of all, I became familiar with that voice, with that knowing, because I had his reflection back. So that was one thing. But learning, as Kharku said before, the listening, the really listening, it means spending time with oneself without distractions, without chanting in the back. Goodness, I have an impatient guy right next to me.
No, I don't want to say anything. I'm listening.
No, Kharku.
I just maybe want to take my mala off.
But developing a practice where you spend time with yourself, being with yourself, whether it's with your breath, whether it's with, but in silence, not feeling the silence, okay? So that you understand the connection to yourself, because that voice is soft, but once you know it and you're familiar with it, it's unequivocal. That would be how I started, right? And Babaji helped a lot. But right now, what is really, really interesting and powerful for me, and I was sharing this recently with Kharku, is that like many of us, many of you, maybe not, I hope, but like many people around the world, this year, 2020, I was stuck in the US for 8 months. And during that time, the whole presidential candidacy was really active. And then COVID and how things were being handled. And I got caught up in the politics of COVID and in the politics of the country and the election campaign. I got caught up on all the emotion. Not that I was caught up on one side or the other, but that I became very, it generated a lot of negative emotions for me, and I could put it aside, but it would come back, and I got caught up in it. And so when I returned to Thailand, it was difficult for me to discuss COVID without my becoming emotional. And this lingered and lingered, and it took a good month before I started breaking the spell and becoming free of it. But then I still remained with a very harsh lens. I was viewing everything through a very critical and very harsh lens. And then I made this commitment to japa, that is happening with some of the devotees around. Started around Hargovind Baba and his heart surgery, and has kind of evolved from there. And so I made this commitment to do a certain number of malas a day for X amount of days. And it completely broke the spell of this struggle, of this grip of a certain mind process that had happened that wasn't allowing me to return and anchor and ground myself back in my heart. And it happened so fast. And so when Kharku was playing with this mala, he was jumping ahead in my story. But really, I would say very alive, not theoretical, not abstract, but really from my own personal experience, because I prefer to share only what I really directly am experiencing in my life, like very salient. But I would say more japa, because that's what's really helping me. And it's so powerful. And if I hadn't had this exact moment where I was really struggling, I couldn't break free of the grip that my mind had. It was like, yeah, the heart and love and compassion and understanding, and my mind would take over, and this very harsh, critical side was salient. That has been my way of breaking free from that. And it really has brought me back to who I know myself to be and where I want to be resting in myself. So that's what I'd like to share about that, Mohan. But thank you for the question, because it's really alive for me. Like, it's a direct teaching I'm receiving right now on this.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, japa, meditation, and yeah, I keep that in mind. I go off track quite often. So
yeah, we all do.
We all go
We
off
all
track.
do. And I think what Kharku said, the listening. So also the time of silence, maybe at the end of japa, 3 to 5 minutes of silence, of resting in the emptiness. We don't have enough emptiness. And it's so magical, because that's where the divine speaks to us. When we're that empty, that receptive, that we're really listening, it's, yeah.
We run a very large organization. I think the first question Babaji asked me, why did I come? And I don't remember fully what my answer was, but I came to meet him, but I remember saying, Babaji, I will do anything for you, anything, but please don't make me beg. And I came from a very humble background. And at that time, in the late 60s and the early 70s, the Hare Krishna were in airports and bus stations everywhere, and kind of obnoxious and seen as obnoxious in many parts of the world, even though their path was so beautiful. In the public arena, it was a little bit pushy. And that's what I was referring to. But maybe I set myself up with that first intention that I gave to Babaji, because I got to be the businessman. But we now have Kamalaya. We have hundreds of employees. We have thousands of guests. We did it rather than be an ashram, we did it in a more pragmatic way, and took the teachings that we've been blessed to have and put it in a more pragmatic setting that made it more accessible. We thought made it more accessible to people who otherwise might not end up going to an ashram, who might just wouldn't touch them. But we are in many ways kind of like a hotel ashram. We have people that come again and again, and they come to the artis, and we sing arti twice a day, and we have the temple, and it's all going on. We have Babaji's kutir, and people come and meditate there. And some of our mentors do their meditation classes in Babaji's room. And I mean, it's really still quite amazing. But the reason I'm saying that is however busy we get, because world life is all about keeping us busy nowadays, and it's a kind of a march towards more intensity. You get extreme sports, and everything is extreme. Politics is extreme. people's way of having fun has become extreme. But if you can remind yourself to go to that ashram, go and visit Ramloti, sing arti, do it at home. All those moments when Mohan, when we get disconnected, just take them. It only takes a minute. It literally only takes a minute to close your eyes and reconnect to something bigger than yourself. And we have to do it all the time. I do it 20, 30 times a day. And when the stress is on, we just have to keep doing it. But at least I go to Arti every day. At least you have to stay connected. It's so easy to get distracted. It's like the whole world is set up to keep us distracted, but it's our job to stay connected.
And I want to add, it's not really about that, but I do want to pick up on something. Kamalaya is Babaji's miracle. We are super clear on that. It could not, absolutely could not exist if it weren't for Babaji's grace. And one of the ways his grace manifested was by the support that we received in numerous ways from Babaji devotees and close friends like Pujari, who's somewhere here in the call, but I want him to know, like Gayatri, like Sundar Baba. I mean, we had real financial presence, emotional support from many of Babaji's key core devotees at times when if they had not stepped forward, we could have not kept going. And it's tangible that it is his miracle through that kind of support. And then other times when there were no more options, an answer to a crisis or a problem would come the next day at the last hour, literally at the last minute, over and over. The fact that we have been able to stay open through this crisis where hospitality has been decimated all over the world, where Thailand is closed, all the borders are closed, there are no tourists, and our business is 98% foreign tourists. It's a miracle. Like nobody in Thailand can believe when all of these big companies are closing all over the world, airlines all over the world and going out of business. This little place called Kamalaya, where Babaji is shining his grace, has remained open. And now a whole nother level of guests, all Thai people or international people residing in Thailand are coming, and they come and they do arti twice a day, even much more than the ones that were coming from abroad. It's extraordinary. I mean, it often brings us to tears. So for those of you who, you know, in whatever ways, I mean, Babaji just uses it. And I want to say, because Gayatri's right there, that, no, not Gayatri, sorry, Pujari.
I didn't
see, yes.
Wonderful,
wonderful. That support, it just is such a confirmation of how Babaji works in these miraculous, extraordinary, unpredictable, unexpected ways, for which we're a testament. I mean, we just happen to be the, no pun intended, stewards of his miracle, but it's his. Beyond reason, Kamalaya is open in these times, beyond comprehension.
Yeah, and you know, we've what Jamuna just said is really potent and really powerful, because the government closed all the hotels in the country when the country closed.
By law.
Right, they closed, forced
and
everyone
Kamalaya
to
stayed
close.
open.
But we were allowed to stay open because we had guests who refused to leave, and we had guests that ended up staying with us for 4.5 months. So we were allowed to stay open. So we never closed throughout this whole period. We've operated at a tremendous loss. So again, operating on faith.
And people coming to Arti from the island who aren't guests.
Oh yeah, we have. We'll have a fire on Shiva Ratri. I'm sure we'll have 50 or more people who will come to the yagya. But we also we were very fortunate because the United Nations in Asia is headquartered in Bangkok, and so we were very fortunate to get a lot of people from the United Nations coming. And now the United Nations has hired us, and they're working with us, and we are doing meditation and mentoring classes with 200 to 300 people a week who work at the United Nations, who are people that are giving back to humanity. And we got a 1-year contract with them that they said if it goes into a second year, then we'll get the whole United Nations, even the American branches. And so we're right now doing mentoring classes with people, United Nations local staff, their senior foreign staff from European countries and American countries, but also the local staff from Fiji to Afghanistan, Hindus, Buddhists, Christians, Muslims, all coming together, 100, 200, 200, up to 250 people at a time, doing meditation classes with us, all sitting on the screen on this Zoom. It's just mind-blowing that only Babaji can do this.
Thank you for sharing it. It was so good. It's a miracle. Oh, I'm sure.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having
the
us.
invitation.
Wow.
And thank you for coming online so we can share. I mean, that's the beauty and magic of it. Yeah.
When the eyes open again, come for Aarti.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing here at the ashram. We have this huge ashram here that it's a miracle. No idea how it happened. Sure, a lot of people have worked hard, but the nuts and bolts I don't understand, and it continues to go on, like you said, in a different format. Now around the world, people are joining in. So thank you all for being here. Another several hundred people will watch this once we put it on YouTube. I'll put that up tomorrow, and several hundred people more will watch it. So
Beautiful.
Thank you, Ramlo.
Thank you for what
Jamuna. Thank you.
And tomorrow night at 7:30, we'll have Muna from Chilianala and Vandana Lal from Delhi, but she'll be in Raniket so that Muna has some internet connection. And so that'll start at 7:30. So it should be another deep and powerful night. Sometimes I have great trouble sleeping. I know Pujari wrote me at midnight. I can't get to sleep after these things. So it's really a very, very special. So your insights and stories have touched my heart. So thank you. And thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Kharku Jamuna. Thank you for this beautiful sharing. It's just a love flowing through our family, keeps us really inspired. Beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pooh. Thank you. Thank you, Ramloti. Really, really. Bole Baba ki jai. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lovely to see everybody.
Yes.
It's an honor.
Bole
I
Baba.
didn't see you, Iman, but I heard your voice there.
I'm in the
Thank
dark.
you.
We're all in the dark.
Moving towards the light, though.
Bole Baba ki jai.